I didn't slam the phone down. I set it on the counter, gently, the way you'd set down something that might still be dangerous. My son had just told me I was getting confused, and that the papers I signed 3 weeks ago were just standard paperwork. Then I asked him one simple question about a date on that document, and the line went so quiet I could hear his refrigerator humming through the phone. 3 seconds later, he hung up on me. Before I get into this, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you've ever had someone you trusted look you dead in the eye and lie to you, hit that like button, because you're going to want to remember how this one ends. My name is Walter Pierce. I'm 68 years old, a retired structural inspector, and I've spent the last 11 years living alone in a 4-unit apartment building I own outright in Dayton, Ohio. My wife Carol passed 6 years ago from ovarian cancer, and this building, the one I bought with her in 1994, the one where we raised our son in Unit 2B before we ever had the money to buy anything bigger, is the last thing on this earth that still smells like her. I inspected buildings for the state for 32 years, bridges, schools, parking garages, apartment complexes. I know how to look at a structure that seems fine on the surface and find the hairline crack that's about to bring the whole thing down. I know because I was trained never to trust what a building looks like. You test the load. You check the foundation. You don't just believe what you're told. I should have remembered that lesson applied to people too. It took my own son almost destroying me to relearn it. It started on a Thursday night in late February, cold enough that the pipes in the building groan when the temperature drops. My son Nathan showed up at my door at 11:15 at night, soaked from the sleet, with his wife Dana right behind him, mascara running down her face like she'd been crying for an hour straight in the car. I let them in before I asked a single question, because that's what a father does. I made coffee. I got Dana a towel. Nathan sat at my kitchen table and put his head in his hands like a man whose whole world had ended. He told me his construction supply company, the one he'd started 6 years earlier with a small loan from me that he'd actually paid back, which is part of why I trusted him, was about to collapse. He said a former business partner had filed a lawsuit against him, frozen his commercial accounts, and that without an emergency loan by the end of the month, he'd lose everything. The lawyers were bleeding him dry. He said if he didn't get financing fast, he and Dana and my 2 grandkids would be out on the street. Dana reached across the table and grabbed my hands. Her fingers were freezing. She looked at me with the kind of desperation that breaks something loose in a father's chest, and she said, "Walter, we don't have anywhere else to go. Please, for the kids." I offered to write them a check right there. I had savings. I told them I could liquidate a CD and hand them $30,000 by Monday morning. No paperwork, no interest, nothing. Nathan shook his head. He said cash wouldn't fix it. He said the bank needed to see hard collateral behind the loan. Something on paper. Something with real equity before they'd approve the kind of financing that would actually save the company. He said the solution was simple. We'd form a small family holding company, and I'd transfer management rights of the apartment building into it temporarily. It would show the bank a stable asset base behind his portfolio. It would also, conveniently, he said, help me avoid a heavy estate tax bill whenever I passed, since the building would already be structured as a managed asset instead of something that had to go through probate. "Nothing changes for you, Dad," he said. "You still live here. You still collect the rent. This is just paperwork protecting all of us." I want to tell you I felt a warning bell go off. I want to tell you 32 years of catching structural failures made me suspicious of a plan that sounded too neat. But I didn't feel suspicious. I felt tired and grieving and desperate to keep a promise I'd made to Carol in the hospital, holding her hand while the machines beeped around us, when she made me swear I'd always look out for our son. Nathan knew exactly which door to knock on. Grief doesn't make you stupid. It makes you generous in exactly the wrong moment. The next morning he came back with a notary I'd never met before, a nervous young man named Perry who kept adjusting his tie and wouldn't quite look at me. There were around 40 pages of documents. I read the first several sections, which laid out the formation of Pierce Family Holdings LLC, with me listed as a passive beneficiary and Nathan as managing member. It matched exactly what we'd discussed. By the time I got to the middle of the stack, my eyes were tired, and my heart was heavier than I wanted to admit, and I stopped reading the fine print. I just signed where the yellow tabs told me to sign. I had no idea that buried on page 26, sandwiched between paragraphs of tax code language and fiduciary boilerplate, was a quitclaim deed, that transferred full legal ownership of my building, not management rights, ownership directly to Nathan's holding company. I signed away the building I built my life around, and I didn't receive $1 in return. 3 weeks passed. Nathan called twice to thank me and tell me the loan had gone through. Dana sent a text with a heart emoji. Everything seemed, on the surface, completely fine. Then, on a bright, cold Tuesday afternoon, I was out front salting the front steps of the building when a man in an orange safety vest showed up with a tripod and a laser level, setting it up right on my front lawn. I walked over, cane in hand, and asked him what exactly he was doing on private residential property. He looked at his tablet, a little confused, and told me he was a contractor hired by Heartland Commercial Bank to conduct a topographical survey and commercial appraisal of the site. Commercial appraisal? I repeated. This is a residential 4-unit building. It's been that way for 30 years. He scrolled his tablet again and read off the client name listed on the work order, Pierce Family Holdings, LLC. He said the bank needed the survey finalized to close out a multi-million-dollar commercial construction loan, and that according to the blueprints attached to the file, the developer planned to demolish all existing residential structures on the lot within 60 days to build a 5-story mixed-use retail building. The February wind felt like it went straight through my coat and into my bones. I asked him, as calm as I could manage, who exactly had ordered this. He said the paperwork listed my son as the authorizing member. I thanked him, told him to finish his work, and walked back inside slower than I'd walked in years. My legs didn't feel like they belonged to me. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Nathan had cried 3 weeks earlier, and for the first time, I let my engineer's brain take over from my father's heart. I laid out the facts the way I used to lay out a structural failure report. Fact 1. 3 weeks ago, my son swore his company was on the brink of bankruptcy from a lawsuit. Fact 2. 2 days earlier, I'd seen him pull into my driveway in a brand new pickup truck, the kind that costs $60,000. And when I asked, he said it was a company lease for client meetings. Fact 3. Dana had posted photos on social media from a resort in Turks and Caicos that same week, captioned something about finally getting a break. Fact 4. Now this building, my building, was scheduled for demolition to build a retail complex, not being used as passive collateral like he'd promised. None of it added up. Men who are drowning in debt don't buy new trucks. Families about to lose their home don't vacation in the Caribbean. The math simply did not work, and I had spent 3 decades trusting math over stories. I called my son that night. I asked him calmly to explain the survey crew on my lawn. He gave me the same soothing, condescending tone you'd use on a confused child. He told me not to worry about it, that it was routine paperwork for the LLC, that I should go back to whatever I was doing and let the professionals handle the business side. In the background, I heard the unmistakable clink of wine glasses and a live jazz band. That's when I asked the question. I asked him what date the LLC filing listed for the transfer of ownership, because the notary had told me during the signing that everything would remain under my name for at least 90 days as a cooling-off period required by Ohio law before management rights fully transferred. There was no such law. I made it up on the spot, testing him. The way you test a beam before you trust it holds weight. Nathan went silent. Then he said, too quickly. I'd have to check with our attorney on that, and the call ended a few seconds later. That was the moment I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that my son had not asked me to help protect our family. He had asked me to sign away everything I had left of my wife. I didn't call him back, screaming. I didn't drive over and pound on his door. An inspector doesn't respond to a cracked foundation by kicking the wall harder. He collects evidence first. That Saturday, while Nathan and Dana were supposedly at a business dinner, I drove to their neighborhood in Kettering and parked 2 houses down. Their trash and recycling bins were at the curb for collection day. Beneath a layer of empty wine bottles and takeout containers, I found 2 grocery bags stuffed with shredded paper. Nathan had clearly bought a home shredder, but he'd underestimated exactly how patient a man who spent 3 decades reading blueprints under a magnifying glass could be. I spent the next 2 nights on my living room floor with a roll of clear tape and a pair of tweezers under a desk lamp, piecing together thousands of narrow paper strips like it was the most important puzzle of my life. Because it was. Slowly, a picture formed. The first document I reconstructed was an email chain between Nathan and a commercial real estate developer named Griff Holloway, with the subject line, Maple Street Acquisition Timeline. The emails discussed transferring the deed from the family LLC into a new entity Nathan solely controlled, and timing it around a groundbreaking date for what they called the retail conversion. Near the center of the reconstructed pile was a financial prospectus, professionally formatted, outlining a $4 million retail development on my exact address, my exact lot lines. The anchor tenant listed on the second page was a national pharmacy chain. My home wasn't collateral for a struggling company. It was never in danger of demolition by accident. It had been the target from the very beginning. The emails were dated 7 months back, long before that rainy night Nathan and Dana showed up crying at my door. The whole crisis had been theater. My son had studied exactly which buttons to press, and he'd pressed them with his mother's memory as the crowbar. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed a weapon sharper than my own outrage. I remembered a man named Reg Calloway, a real estate litigation attorney I'd worked alongside years earlier when the state investigated a contractor for falsifying inspection reports on a bridge project. Reg didn't negotiate. Reg dismantled people professionally and left nothing standing. I found his number in an old contact book and called his office Monday morning. I sat across from Reg in his downtown office 2 days later, an envelope of reconstructed documents on the desk between us. He read through everything without interrupting, his jaw tightening slightly more with each page. "Your son didn't just take advantage of you emotionally, Mr. Pierce," he said finally. "He orchestrated a corporate real estate acquisition and used a fraudulent quitclaim deed buried inside legitimate paperwork to do it. That's not just a family dispute. That's a textbook case of deed fraud." I told him there was more he needed to know. I explained that back in 2016, right after Carol's first cancer diagnosis, fearing exactly this kind of vulnerability, we had quietly transferred the building into an irrevocable trust managed by an independent trustee at a firm 2 states away, specifically to protect it from ever being sold, mortgaged, or transferred by anyone, including me. I had the legal right to live there and collect rental income for the rest of my life. I did not have the legal authority to give away ownership. No one did. Reg actually laughed out loud, a short, disbelieving bark. He pulled up the county records himself, cross-checked the trust documents I'd brought, and shook his head. "Your son just took a piece of paper with absolutely zero legal standing," he said, "and used it as collateral for a bank loan. Do you understand what that means? He didn't just try to steal from you. He committed federal bank fraud against a federally insured institution, using an asset he never owned in the first place." The plan Reg and I built over the following 2 weeks was simple, and it was surgical. We would let Nathan keep believing he'd won. Reg quietly filed to confirm the trust's standing and prepared everything needed to hand federal investigators an airtight case the moment Nathan tried to execute his fraud through legal channels. Meanwhile, I would go back to playing exactly the role Nathan already believed I was playing, a tired, aging, easily managed father slipping slowly into confusion. I started small. I called Nathan by his late grandfather's name during a visit and watched a flicker of satisfaction cross Dana's face before she covered it with fake concern. I misplaced my car keys on purpose, letting Nathan find them in the freezer. I mentioned chest tightness once, just once, and watched him barely react at all. They stopped watching me closely after that. They believed the harmless, fading old man they'd invented was real. That belief gave me exactly the window I needed. On a Thursday morning, while they were supposedly at another meeting with investors, I drove to a small electronics shop across town and paid cash for a voice-activated recorder disguised as a plain black button, along with a tiny GPS tracker. I left my regular phone on my kitchen counter, since I suspected Nathan had installed a tracking app under the excuse of checking on Dad. That evening I called Dana and asked her, in a shaky voice, to come by and help me sort through some paperwork because my chest felt tight and I didn't want to be alone. She arrived less than an hour later carrying a designer handbag that cost more than 3 months of my old state pension. While she used my bathroom and I heard her murmuring on a phone call to Nathan through the door, I slipped the recorder into the small zippered makeup pocket inside her bag. I sat back down at my kitchen table before she came out, letting my hands tremble slightly, letting a little tea spill on the counter that I apologized for too many times. She sighed with visible irritation, wiped up my mess, told me to sit down before I hurt myself, and left 20 minutes later without ever suspecting a thing. That night, alone in my apartment, I poured myself a small glass of bourbon and turned up the volume on the receiver. Their conversation filled the quiet room, crystal clear. "The demo permits clear next week," Nathan's voice said. casual, almost bored. Once the old man's building comes down, Griff closes on the 4 million, and we're finally done playing nursemaid to my father. Dana laughed. A light, easy laugh, completely without guilt. And once he's officially declared incompetent, he can't even contest it. I already talked to a facility. They said with his cognitive decline, getting a judge to sign off on guardianship will take maybe 3 weeks. Should we tell his doctor to adjust his blood pressure meds again? Nathan asked. Keep him a little foggier for the competency hearing? Dana said something I will never forget as long as I live. She said, just don't overdo the dosage change until after the hearing. We need him confused, not dead. Not yet, anyway. They were not just stealing my home. They were planning to have me legally declared incompetent, and they were casually discussing manipulating my medication to make sure the plan worked, with the calm, businesslike tone people use to discuss a spreadsheet. I did not sleep that night. But by morning, the grief had hardened into something colder and infinitely more useful. 6 days later, a deputy sheriff named Officer Reyes knocked on my door at 7 in the morning holding a manila folder. He looked deeply uncomfortable, the way decent young officers do when they're handed a job they don't fully understand. Behind him, parked crooked across the street, Nathan leaned against his new truck with his phone held up, recording, grinning the exact way a man grins when he believes he's already won. This is a notice of eviction, Officer Reyes said, holding it out. Filed by Pierce Family Holdings LLC. I need you to gather your things. I took the folder from his hands. I didn't shake. I didn't raise my voice. Officer Reyes, I said, before you go any further, I have one question for you. Are you aware this property has been held in an irrevocable trust since 2016, meaning no individual, including my son, has ever had legal authority to transfer or sell it? He blinked. His hand drifted slightly away from his belt. Sir, I was just handed paperwork from the county clerk, he said. It had a judge's signature. It looked standard. I understand, I said gently. But standard paperwork doesn't apply to assets locked inside a trust a judge would need clear title evidence to override. Whoever filed this committed fraud against a federal court. And I think you should hear something before you do anything else. I pulled out my phone, tapped once, and connected it to a small speaker I'd hidden earlier on my porch railing behind a potted fern. I pressed play and turned the volume all the way up. Dana's recorded voice rang out across the quiet street, crisp and unmistakable. Once he's officially declared incompetent, he can't even contest it. Then Nathan's voice, casual as ever. Should we tell his doctor to adjust his blood pressure meds again? Keep him a little foggier for the competency hearing? And then Dana again, laughing. Just don't overdo the dosage change until after the hearing. We need him confused, not dead. Not yet, anyway. The street went dead silent except for the recording. Across the road, Nathan's grin disappeared like someone had reached in and physically pulled it off his face. He fumbled his phone, dropped it on the asphalt, and stood frozen, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time in his life. Officer Reyes stared at the folder in his hands like it had turned into something radioactive. He looked up, and every trace of the routine, sympathetic tone he'd walked in with was gone. Sir, he said quietly, I need to call this in right now. He stepped away, radio in hand, and within minutes the quiet street filled with the low rumble of approaching engines. Reg had already alerted federal investigators 3 days earlier, ready to move the instant Nathan attempted to execute the fraudulent transfer through law enforcement. 2 unmarked black SUVs turned the corner and blocked the street entirely. Federal agents in dark jackets stepped out with the kind of controlled efficiency that told you everything about how this was going to end. Nathan tried to bolt back toward his truck. He didn't make it 3 steps before 2 agents had him against the hood, arms pulled behind his back, cuffs clicking shut. Dana came running out of their car from where she'd been waiting, high heels slipping on the wet pavement, and froze when she saw the agents surrounding her husband. Her face went the color of ash. Dad, please, she said, her voice cracking. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Please, Walter. I stood on my own porch, in my own robe, on the ground I had built my entire life around, and I looked at the woman who had discussed dosing my medication like she was adjusting a thermostat. You didn't just try to steal my home, I said, my voice steady and completely without warmth. You sat in my kitchen, drank my tea, and calculated exactly how confused you needed to keep me so a judge would sign away my rights. That's not desperation, that's premeditation. Nathan, pressed against the hood of his truck, found his voice at last, shouting something about a misunderstanding, about corporate restructuring, about how none of this meant what it sounded like. "You forgot one thing, Nathan," I said, loud enough for the agents to hear clearly. "You built an entire fraud on top of a house you never actually owned. I put this building into an irrevocable trust 8 years ago to protect it from exactly this. Every signature you forged, every loan you took out against it, was built on a foundation that was never yours to stand on." The lead agent read him his rights as Nathan's legs finally gave out, held up only by the grip of the men on either side of him. Dana was handcuffed moments later, sobbing, repeating my name over and over like it might still mean something to me. It didn't. My daughter-in-law had died for me the moment I heard her voice discussing my heart medication like an inconvenient variable in a spreadsheet. I didn't attend the trial. I watched the news coverage from my kitchen instead, the same table where all of it had started. The evidence was overwhelming: the recorded confession, the reconstructed shredded documents, the forged deed, the fraudulent bank loan built entirely on an asset that was never legally available to transfer. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. Nathan was sentenced to 22 years for federal bank fraud and wire fraud. Dana received 18 years for conspiracy and for a separate charge related to the discussion of altering my prescribed medication, which prosecutors argued constituted attempted harm. Their assets were seized entirely. The new truck, the Caribbean vacation photos that had helped convict them once prosecutors subpoenaed the timeline. Every designer bag Dana owned, auctioned off by federal marshals. I sold the building 6 months later, once the trust restrictions were legally cleared for a proper sale, to a respectful young couple who wanted to renovate it into a real family home again, not tear it down for profit. I took the proceeds, combined them with my pension, and moved 2 states away to a quiet town on the Carolina coast, close enough to hear the ocean from my porch every morning. I used part of the money to set up a small fund at the county courthouse, one that pays for independent legal consultations for elderly homeowners who suspect a family member is pressuring them into signing something they don't fully understand. I named it after Carol. Every time someone uses it to catch a bad deal before they sign it, I feel like I've turned the exact weapon that was used against me into something that protects somebody else's father. I still sit on my porch most evenings with a glass of iced tea, watching the tide come in, and I think about the promise I made to my wife in that hospital room. I kept it. I looked out for our son, right up until the moment he stopped being the boy I raised and became someone I had never met. Some of the most dangerous people in your life don't break down your door in the middle of the night. They already have a key, and they call you Dad. Forgiveness is a virtue, but protecting the only thing you have left is not weakness. It's a responsibility you owe yourself. Love your family, but love yourself enough to walk away from anyone, blood or not, who mistakes your trust for an opening. If Walter's calm, calculated justice gave you chills tonight, hit that like button right now and tell me in the comments, have you ever had to cut off someone in your own family to protect yourself? I want to hear your story. And subscribe if you want more stories of quiet, patient justice finally catching up to the people who thought they'd gotten away with it.